Pictures. Pictures everywhere. One of a series of Kodak Lectures. Pictures are everywhere. With this title in mind, we shall look tonight at photographs of many subjects taken in many different places. It isn't expected that all of them will be equally interesting to all of you, but we do hope that each picture will suggest a new photographic line of thought to some members of the audience, and thus broaden their outlook pictorially. First, let us consider why we use a camera at all. Is it just to take a record of holidays once a year, or because we like fiddling with a camera and with chemicals, or to satisfy an ambition to see our work on the walls of a major exhibition? There are many possible reasons. So far as these pictures are concerned, they were made from the negatives of one who uses his camera regularly on all sorts of occasions, because he likes to be out in the open as often as he can. On annual holidays, at weekends, during lunchtime, and even on occasional business journeys, a camera has been his good companion. He enjoys his hobby because it encourages him to get about and observe things. Tonight, therefore, our pictures are all in the out-of-doors category, and their interest may depend on the particular subject, the lighting, unusual treatment, or perhaps on all three. On this occasion indoor shots are omitted. There are, of course, lectures on this subject, including specialized instruction about lighting and the use of flash. The purpose of the present talk and the illustrations is to give a lead, which we hope will be followed, in exercising the faculty of observation, and so help you to select useful subjects for your camera. Here is a very popular shot, Morton Old Hall, which is taken many times a year by visitors when touring around the county of Cheshire. One might almost say that is hackneyed, and it is certainly reproduced in county magazines and the general press as often as any other black and white mansion in Britain. Then why bother about it, you say? Well, after all, it is an attractive scene in its own right, one that brings back a happy memory to thousands. But the main point is that it introduces this series by leading us towards a less obvious picture. One sees the present view from a point outside the hall, across the moat. Let us enter and look out from inside. In one of the upper rooms of the hall there is a small section of a leaded window that can be opened, and through it one sees this view. The whole arrangement is most interesting, and, so to speak, composes itself. Notice how the gables are set in a sort of curve, helping the buildings to frame the courtyard down below. There is a strong impression of 3D in this scene. Whether the figures are desirable is a matter of taste. This shot was made at a club outing, and the photographer waited for some of his friends to appear in the doorway, although they didn't know about it until they saw the print. Another interesting point is the use of a high angle. Altogether this is a more striking picture than the conventional one in the previous slide. This shows a similar idea. High viewpoint with the camera looking down on the sunny side of the high street at Hereford. But there's no doubt that the figure is essential to this shot. It was taken from a hotel bedroom window by a visitor, about 9 a.m., before leaving the town. The sun was just right, and all that was necessary was someone suitable on the pavement. Luckily the young lady came out at that moment to lower the sun blind. A click of the shutter, and a happy picture, again from inside, look out, was in the bag. The moral is, always be on the lookout. Now, down to the ground floor. A lady is sweeping in front of her house at Ulster, near Stratford-on-Avon. It's early morning again, sometime between 8 and 9 o'clock. As has been said so often, the side lighting at that time of day or in the evening, is much better for picture making than the strong overhead sun at midday. On holiday, especially when touring, an early morning walk round a town will often reward the picture maker with attractive genre studies. As in the earlier slides, you will notice that the background buildings are of black and white architecture. Some may think they are distracting, but, so long as the building is genuine and not fake Tudor style, it contributes to the character of the scene. Part is sometimes better than the whole, we are told. Here is a case in point, the steps in the Market Square at Richmond, Yorkshire. The usual holiday snap taken at this place is a general scene of the square, just the sort of thing one can buy at a picture postcard shop. The photographer with a pictorial eye likes to choose something that is different, mainly by cutting out the inessentials. This shot is frankly a pattern picture, relying on the strong backlighting, the lines of steps, and the opposing verticals of the lamp columns. These are the theme of this scene, with the background figures and motor cars as incidental interest. Quite the opposite is true of this study, taken at another Yorkshire marketplace, Bentham in the West Riding. The ladies themselves are the subject of the picture, which is called Bargain Hunters. Observe the backlighting once more, picking out the figures against the background in shadow. A group like this requires much more patience than the single-figure shot. It might take as long as half an hour before the right moment arrives, but it's worth the wait. Sometimes it helps if the cooperation of the stall holder is invited. These good folk are usually willing to oblige, and when they do, remember to send them a print. Another small group, taken with the candid camera technique, on a club outing. The three members were busy discussing the route to be taken by the motor coach on the way home. There was some difference of opinion, and this rather serious-looking record of a not really world-shaking problem was the result. Shots of this kind can form an amusing collection that will bring back many happy memories of fellow workers. We are still in the realm of the not-too-serious. The club of which this Roli fan is a member has regular evening excursions during the summer season, and on this occasion they were looking for pictures on the shore and the sand dunes. A fellow member took this when his colleague was focusing for a texture shot, and titled it 1/25 at f/16. Notice the pleasant effect of the soft evening light, when the sun was in a slight haze. The negative of this slide is ideal for printing, with just sufficient contrast to give a pearly quality on normal paper. Bear this in mind when looking at the next picture. This was taken about the same time in the evening as the last picture, though on a different occasion, when the sun was very brilliant indeed. The result is a print of rather too much contrast. Had it been possible, some degree of correction might have been made by curtailing development of the negative. Still, the opportunity of producing an up-to-date effect in the style of Cartier-Bresson was not to be missed. It may not suit everyone's pictorial taste, but it has the merit of contemporary approach. The newly built framework, the smiling teenager and the background building, in modern architectural treatment, have a unifying impact. Photography in local parks is often best in the seasons other than summer. June, July and August are months when the foliage is full, causing opaque masses of shadow. This shot was taken during a brilliant day in April, when the sunlight was not obscured by leaves. The tree trunk in the middle background is rather heavy, though it cannot be avoided if the strong line of shadow, an important element of the composition, is to be featured. This marked shadow, the diagonal line of the path, and the feeling of adventure as the boy moves into the sunlight, combine in something that approaches the dramatic. The effect is one which is often used in cine shots, and, in the popular phrase, it helps the picture to tell a story. Conkers, another real-life subject for the photographer, again in woodland, when a hazy sun is just penetrating through the trees. A feeling of 3D is introduced by placing the boys slightly further away from the camera than the tree on the right, and forward of the left-hand tree, which itself stands out in front of the rest of the woodland in the background. A shot like this is useful for a club competition, say on the subject of autumn, and would almost certainly be accepted by the local press if offered at the right season. The moment chosen for shooting this harvest picture was when a break in the clouds picked out the corn stooks in the middle distance, which stand out brightly against the shadow of the distant hillside. Composition of harvest scenes can be difficult because the stooks usually form an undesirable pattern. In this slide you will see that the photographer had chosen for his subject the lane between the cut and uncut corn, and has emphasized the perspective by using a low viewpoint. The scene has the atmosphere of brighter weather returning after a storm which interrupted the harvesters. Pattern pictures are usually found in street, industrial areas of Dockland. Here, however, we have one inside a hay barn. It was there only for a few fleeting moments, when the sun shone through a narrow open doorway. This was one of the occasions when the possibilities of the subject were seen on a day when there was no sunshine, and the photographer decided to return when conditions were right. The arrangement is what used to be described as all-overish, that is, there is rather a lot to look at and no true center of interest, but that is characteristic of an acceptable pattern picture. After the barn interior we come naturally to a still life study on a country roadside. There is nothing so effective as the photographic medium for depicting shape and texture, as we see from this and the following examples. Correct lighting is, of course, essential to satisfactory quality. These two empty milk kits, as they are called, not churns, were found exactly as they are here, though, no doubt, the farmer had placed them both upright, and some youngsters had upset one. Fortunately for the man with the camera, the arrangement was made all the more interesting. Here we have a similar style and treatment, the main difference being the particular beverage for which the containers are used. We have now moved back into town, to find these barrels on the dockside. Again, the whole effect depends upon soft evening sunlight, shining on the upper part of the subject from the side, and emphasizing the shape of the casks. The shadow areas of the foreground and the background hold the picture together. This has turned out to be a successful exhibition picture, perhaps because of its title, My Goodness. This is not put in as a warning of what might happen to those who indulge too much in the contents of the barrels we have just seen. In any case, it seems that the lady commemorated on the stone lived some 78 years, so she didn't do so badly. No, this slide shows, once more, a simple subject that is made interesting photographically by the lighting which picks out the texture, especially as the stone stands out against the darkened background. Some may think that gravestones are gloomy and uninteresting, but there are those who are indifferent to the subject as such, and are concerned only with exercising their photographic skill in making a print of dramatic quality. How many of us, who live and work in a town, wander around looking for attractive shots during the lunch break? In good weather it's a very pleasant thing to do, and is healthy into the bargain, much better than spending all the time in a cafe. Whether or not we find a picture, such as this one, outside a city art gallery, the eye is trained to be more observant, and, with practice, we are able to visualize what a potential shot would be like under suitable lighting conditions. All we have to do then is to turn up with the camera at the right moment. The successful worker must have endless patience. This slide, too, is a lunchtime shot, in which patience and luck played their parts equally. The idea was to have the gateway framed by the foliage at the top and the shadows at the bottom, and this could only be done at midday during a particular fortnight in the year. If that time goes by when the weather is poor and there is no sun out, as the phrase goes, you've had it. Success often depends on knowing where to go, and when. The photographer here was alive to this, and so got his picture. Incidentally, he waited for a suitable figure and this lady, quite unconsciously, obliged. You carry your camera, ready for use, when you go to and from work. It isn't suggested that you should always do it, but it is a useful tip to follow when the weather is promising. This picture is one that the photographer spotted when he was going for the evening bus. The arches of the office building are a striking principal feature, and their shadow areas help to pick out the homeward-bound city workers. Again, the lighting is only suitable for a few minutes in shots of this kind. What title shall we give this shot? How about Drake's Game in Town? A new bowling green has been laid in a bomb-damaged area, close to the cathedral in the background, so that the shot has a certain amount of news value, and, being rather unusual, was sold for reproduction in the local press. Another example of the wisdom of carrying your camera during off-duty moments. And it has local history value too. One print was included in a photographic exhibition which was held when there was a week of civic celebrations. In a case like this the lighting is not of great importance. The weather was dull, but what really mattered was the situation and the human interest. Here's an architectural shot, with a difference. Spring come to town. Only two elements in it, contrasting the natural foliage of the tree with the decorated sculpture of the man-made tower. In arranging the composition, care has been taken to view the scene from a position that brings the tower well above the tree top, and so give it prominence. Observe that there has been no attempt to avoid the converging verticals, because the intention is to convey an impression of looking upwards. The sky was the usual pale azure of springtime, and a light yellow filter has given sufficient contrast with the stonework. Another lunchtime pleasure. This idea looks familiar. Haven't we seen it already in this series? Of course, there was the sunblind shot at Hereford. But, this time, the picture was not a chance shot. It had been conceived some days before, and the photographer bided his time. It was taken about 9 a.m., before the street was too busy. Notice that the figures have been secured in suitable positions, after exercising a little patience, and that the shot leaves something to the imagination, namely, the traffic outside the picture space. Now let us look at pictures with animals, always attractive to the alert photographer, and polar bears, perhaps, the most attractive of all. As far as technique goes, there is a similarity between this shot and the last one. That exposure had to be made just when the bobby was still for a fraction of a second, and in this one there was a moment when the bear, the most restless of animals, halted before turning to promenade the other way. A quick exposure at that moment did the trick. The fur of an animal always gains in appearance when taken against the light. This tip is even more apparent in the next picture. Lighting here is ideal for this breed of dog, showing off his coat at its best. The picture was taken about midday in December, in fact on the last day of the year, although the result has the appearance of evening light in summer. The dog was just as restless as the polar bear, because it was awaiting the return of its mistress, and was alternating between looking over the wall along the road, and then running across the garden to the gate. So that, again, it was a matter of shooting when the dog was still for a brief moment on top of the wall. A happy shot, which could be a saleable picture. Cat and shadow picture was an opportunist shot, because Pussy was noticed earlier, and followed to this corner where she settled down for a siesta. Once she was in this restful position, exposure could be made at leisure. The striking effect of composition here depends very largely on the curved shadow of the railing which keeps the animal within the frame. Cat admirers have remarked that it is a pity the face is in shadow, but, of course, she wanted it there to avoid the hot midday sun. This scene also made a color shot in which the maraude cat contrasted with the gray-green slate of the step on which she rests. This shot of goose families is one of a pair. Here we see how the birds are straggling along, evidently in a hurry, with no attempt to keep in martial order. They seem to lack the parental control of father. Mother is there all right, in fact 3 of her, but father is missing. In a few moments he joins them and rounds them up. Here is the result. A well-organized family group, with father in the middle and in complete control. His coloring tends to hide him against the dark background, but he's there just the same. Geese, at any rate the female of the species, and the goslings are always helped by a dark background, and this will be ensured by shooting against the light. This picture and the previous one were taken by the photographer following the birds while they were on the run, so to speak. They could well earn a reproduction fee if linked with the slight story which has been suggested here. From geese to the most popular subject of all. Swans have been photographed probably more often than anything else in the animal kingdom, and many people wish never to see such a picture again. But, curiously enough, they still find their way into exhibitions, even the Royal and the Salon. The present picture is a more or less conventional composition, which has been reproduced a few times. The real satisfaction was in the actual taking, which depended upon persuading the swan to swim into the picture, and at the same time include the tree branches. The persuading was done, extravagantly, with cake, all the bread having been eaten at lunchtime. And now for a shot of a slightly different kind. Why not take a swan out of the water for a change? This one, at Stokesay Castle, was very friendly and quite inquisitive. The original idea was to take the usual type of shot, a swan on the water, with the castle in the background. But the swan cheerfully made for dry land, and waddled towards the man with the camera. So, there was only one thing to do, snap while the going was good. Perhaps this bird knew all about the cake technique. Be that as it may, the result makes a pleasant change. There's more thought being given to pictorial composition here and even more patience than in the last 2 pictures. But all have the same basic idea, a single white subject in a natural setting. Patience was necessary to wait until the horse and cloud both moved into favorable positions, at the same time bearing in mind the balance which is given by the tree peeping above the hilltop. This is one of the rare occasions when the sun being directly behind the camera is not a disadvantage. In fact, it is a considerable help in strengthening the highlight. But bear in mind that it was a low, evening sun, about 7 p.m. in August. Last of the animal section is something of a puzzle picture. How many of you can guess what it is? The picture is a straight print from a straight negative, no funny business of any kind, not even shading or extra printing. The small dark spot is a sparrow, so that is some guide to the scale of the oval shape. It was taken when the cameraman was lunching in a cafe at Kensington Gardens. He looked up at the circular rooflight on which the sparrow was hopping about, waited for the bird to come to rest, and then clicked. The exposure was given for the bright roof light, so that the ceiling of the room, the black surround, was much underexposed, and is almost clear film in the negative. Another striking idea. Now for a couple of more usual ideas for picture making, children this time. Whether you have any youngsters of your own doesn't matter very much. The real fun in photographing kiddies lies in stalking and shooting them unawares, and that you can often do best if they are not of your own family. By keeping a wary eye open you can spot a likely model, and then, exercising our old friend patience, shoot at the right moment. This little lady was climbing down the rocks into the water, and in this picture she's just looking round, apprehensively perhaps, to make sure that Daddy is not too far away, in case of a slip. Daddy, in fact, was just handy, off stage. Example of the same stalking technique. This time you can just see the top of Daddy's head at the bottom right. The boy was perched on his shoulder, and both were too interested in the fun of the fair, it was taken at a showground, to notice the man with the camera. To avoid being seen he had to shoot from some feet away, and rely on enlarging a small part of the negative. This is reproduced from a 12 times enlargement. Of course, shots like this are easier when taken with a telephoto lens, so long as the camera can be held steadily enough. There are two interesting points about this picture. First, the stolen shots technique, as in the last two examples, and secondly the high angle, emphasizing the use of the camera as an unobserved spectator. The separation of two equal points of interest by placing them at the edges of the frame is unconventional, but they are successfully linked by the seat itself. And there's a subtle symbolism in the title, which is Two Different Worlds. One man devours hot news in The Star, while the other studies advertisements of country cottages in Dalton's Weekly. The scene is in Trafalgar Square. This, too, is in the square, one of the most popular places for the photographic visitor in London. One can't claim that there is anything unique in a shot of the fountains, they are probably taken as often as any other fountains in the world. But there is something to learn from this shot, where the endeavor is to use the camera's especial quality of depicting texture. The figure of polished stone, sprayed by the fountain, fairly glistens in the soft sunlight, and so becomes a strong foreground interest. Emphasis must be laid on the soft lighting. This picture was taken on a morning in autumn, when contrast was not too great. Strong summer lighting would tend to give a harsh result, unless development of the negative could be carefully controlled. Now we'll look at a few intriguing shots of pattern in nature, in this case, ice formation. The diagonal line is the edge of ice of a previous day, and in the foreground is a fresh formation on the pond, where it had been broken up to allow cattle to drink. Ice, like water, must be taken against the light so as to show the surface texture. Contrast is, of course, rather extreme, requiring careful exposure and development of the negative. Or frost on foliage can form an attractive pattern if care is taken in selection. Although there is more sparkle when the sun is out, a satisfactory result can be obtained, as in this shot, in a dull winter light. It was, in fact, quite misty, but this is not apparent in a close-up. To be sure of getting the detail crisp and sharp, it is best to use a small stop, which probably means using a tripod as well. In any case, when this kind of subject is tackled the temperature is so low that the hands are liable to dither, and for that reason also the use of a tripod is recommended. Another winter picture, which the author calls Witch's Broom. Successful snow shots are almost invariably taken in bright sunlight, to secure sparkle and texture. But this one is another scene which was taken in a dull light, with just sufficient variation of tone in the snow forming the background to the sinister-looking bush, the strong main subject. Those of you who are golfers as well as photographers may like to know that this was taken on a golf course that was temporarily unplayable. So, there's a suggestion: if golf is off because of snow, take your camera and find a picture around the greens instead. At first glance this may be something of a puzzler. Is it marble or wood, for instance? No, just the swirl of a river in full spate, as the North Country folk call it. You all know how, when the water comes rushing over the rocky river bed, a large boulder may cause a small whirlpool, creating a circling pattern of white foam. Here we have such a formation, and on the outer edge, where the foam is broken up, we get the peculiar marble-like effect. Exposure should be just sufficient to give the slightest suggestion of movement in the pattern, about 1/100th of a second. Here is the same river about half a mile farther downstream, after the water has settled down quietly in a wider and shallower part. This time the glassy smoothness of the surface, just the opposite of the conditions in the last shot, gives the desired effect, wintertime reflections. The inverted images of the trees and church spire have a mysterious quality about them, while the stones in the river bed below are faintly ethereal. One exhibition judge suggested that the picture should be presented upside down, and then called fantastic landscape. It's always possible that a trick like this could carry off a prize in a club competition. This, the last of the nature section, shows an eclipse of the moon in progressive stages. The slight detail in the foreground and the variation of tone in the sky registered on the negative when the first two exposures were made. By the time when the third was taken, all, except the moon, was quite dark. With the camera firmly on a tripod, exposures of 10 seconds were given each time, at an aperture of f/4.5 on tri-x. Between each exposure there was an interval of 12 minutes, except for the third, which was delayed about 3 minutes until a passing cloud had moved across the moon. A word of warning. As the camera is on the tripod in the open air for about 1 hour, there is a risk of condensation on the lens surface, owing to the damp evening air. Between exposures examine it by the light of a torch and, if necessary, remove any moisture. The pictures in the final section of this lecture all have a nautical flavor, and the first 2 or 3 of them are influenced by the photographer's interest in the pattern shot. This one also owes something to an endeavor to bring out the shape and texture of the subject, which is the stern of S ship at the quayside. The porthole, surrounded by brightly lit rivet heads, pulls the eye very strongly. This slide has a punning title, aimed at those who specialize in technique. Characteristic curve. The quayside again, this time concentrating on the curving shadow of the net, which is always suspended overhead to prevent accidents when cargo is unloaded. The object, which looks like a raft, is one of the slings in which the cargo is hoisted ashore from the ship's hold. The treatment here is entirely one of pattern, and, therefore, a strong print, of good contrast, is desirable. A walk through Dockland in one of our seaports is well worthwhile, and the observant cameraman will find many subjects there, not necessarily winners, but each one a stimulating exercise in technique, a useful practical experience for beginner and advanced worker alike. Stepping from shore onto the ship for a moment, we have another attractive subject, bits and pieces of the tackle used for tying up. Of course, this sort of thing has been done before, yet there's a great deal of satisfaction to be had in having a go at it, if only once in a photographic lifetime. If you produce a striking arrangement, with some degree of pictorial merit, as we see here, then you may quite contentedly leave such material to the other fellow in future. This shot was taken in a bright, diffused light, the subject having sufficient contrast in itself. Direct sunlight would have given too harsh a result. Back on the quayside for another of those stolen shots which tells a story. On the deck of a small coaster an engine room hand takes his midday nap, while his mate ponders about the week's perms. Another example of the high viewpoint and its advantage in getting an unobserved shot. The camera in this case was a fair distance away, and the picture is from a small part of the negative enlarged about 8 or 9 times. Once again a telephoto lens, though not essential, could make things easier. Camera angle for this picture was very similar to that of the last photograph and, come to think of it, they could share the same title, Off Duty. As we have seen in earlier examples, inanimate objects in suitable lighting have an interest, almost a personality, of their own. This boat, lying diagonally across the frame, is no exception. The dock side on the left and the bow of the ship in the upper corner complete the composition. It will be seen that there is a full range of tones from the highest light to the deepest shadow. A Dockland scene which depends very largely on the effect of the curved foreground shadow. You remember the shot of the sleeping cat in the shadow of the wrought ironwork. A very similar treatment. In dull lighting, this particular dock offers no inspiration at all, but, when the sun is in the right quarter, there are many photographic possibilities, even in color. It is here that the multicolored buoys, such as the one in the background, are brought for repainting, providing a brilliant contrast with the drab dock warehouses. There's a good deal to be said for exploring the neighborhood first, and returning later when conditions are favorable for picture making. Here is a variation on the well-known theme of Tug and Liner. The tugboat, sailing into the diagonal lines of the ship's hawsers, conveys a strong feeling of movement, while the prow of the otherwise unseen ocean liner towers impressively above the general scene. The fact that only a fraction of the huge ship is visible is really an advantage. There are occasions when it is wise to leave something to the viewer's imagination. If you recall the Aesop fable which tells of the captive lion who is released by a mouse gnawing through the ropes that bind him, you will understand the symbolic title of this picture, The Lion and the Mouse. Twin tugs really in action this time, hauling one of the largest floating cranes in the world, aptly named Mammoth. Shots like this and the previous one are all the more effective for being taken into the light. The tugs are in silhouette but have sufficient detail in the print, while the water sparkles as it always does in contre-jour shots. Although the movement is directly at right angles to the camera, the light is so brilliant that it is possible to give 1/300th or even 1/500th or a second and so avoid any blurring of the image. The lecture ends with two shots which any photographer who visits London may take while walking by the Thames. The first, a view across the river from the side of London Bridge looking towards Adelaide House, is a not-so-obvious one. The wall at the right and the ship's stern, jutting out with its fluttering flag, are necessary to balance the mass of the bridge, and the slightly hazy September atmosphere helps to emphasize the illusion of distance across the river. This scene was taken from a viewpoint part way down steps which lead to the riverside. As the tide leaves a slippery deposit on the steps, tread carefully, or down will go photographer and camera and all. We opened this series with a popular scene and we close it with one, a view from Victoria Embankment, looking towards Blackfriars Bridge. Nevertheless, it is a most satisfying shot to have in the bag. The composition may be conventional, but it simply cried out to be taken on a lovely afternoon in late autumn. The author was, in fact, on a business visit to London and, as he generally carries a small camera in his case on these occasions, he was able to take this shot which has been successful in many ways. His final advice to you is, have a camera ready, pictures are everywhere.